Great. So continue the chain. Good. Very well. So next speaker is Sarah from University College London.
Yes.
And are you at Calibra or at UCL?
At UCL.
At UCL, okay. Because your co-authors, some of them are from Calibra and some of them from UCL.
So,
great.
Yeah, this is work that I did when I was doing a summer internship with Calibra.
Oh, that's great.
That's why, but now I'm back at UCL.
So your talk is on Winkle.
Yes.
Longrange Attacks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, so before I start, I'm just gonna give a very quick introduction on proof of work, and this is just like to transition to proof of stake. So yeah, I mean, proof of work, we have talked about it a lot already, and it has many problems. I'm just gonna talk about a couple, as I said, just to transition. So one of the problems is like probabilistic finality. So as you know, in proof of work, when we have a chain, you know, we can never be sure that it's like the chain, because if we have an adversary that has like enough power, they could just fork this chain, create an alternative chain. And so it means that usually in order to be sure that the transaction is accepted, we're gonna wait for like some blocks. Some people suggest, you know, 6 blocks, but that's really at the discretion of the users. And so what it means is that we have a high latency. So again, that's something that I think we have covered in the previous talk and also before. And the other obvious problem with proof of work is the huge energy consumption. So again, I think that's something we talked about on Monday, and I think that's kind of like the obvious big problem with proof of work. We have, you know, climate change. A lot of us actually, you know, care about the planet. So really, there are many reasons why we would want to look for an alternative. Okay, so this was just to transition to proof of stake. So I think most of the people probably here, you already know like the intuition between proof of stake. So let me explain it here. So in proof of stake, unlike proof of work, we have a known validator set. So these are the stakeholders, right? They are the ones that are in charge of running the consensus protocol. So this could be like a permission system. For example, Dalia Monday talked about Libra, where we have, you know, a permission set of validators that are running the consensus protocol. But you could also think about some more more open or less permission system, where, for example, you could just like deposit some money into a smart contract on something, and then this will just give us the list of validators, right? Okay. So this validator, they run the consensus protocol. So there are a lot of research on proof of stake and many different protocols. So for the sake of this talk, I'm going to assume that the validators, they run a BFT-like consensus protocol. So again, we know who they are. There's one person that is elected leader, propose a block. Other people, you know, vote on it. And that's how it works. And so what is great with this is that we have no forks, right? Because everyone has to agree on the set. So we have this kind of like property of like instant finality, unlike proof of work where you could always like have a fork. Now, additionally, usually this proof of stake protocol, they allow for the set of validators to change, right? So you could have, you know, somewhere here, some reconfiguration. Some people will leave the protocol, and some people will join the protocol, and this will give us our new validator set, right? Okay, so just so I've been, you know, quite abstract here. So just to give a few examples of such protocol, there is like hot stuff. There is also Tendermint that are using, you know, similar stuff and similar protocol, and I'm sure there are others. So I'm not going to go into detail of that. Okay, so proof of stake, it's great. Now we don't have this whole proof of work wasting energy. We have instant finality. Amazing. But there are many problems. When you take the proof of work away, there are many, you know, vectors of attacks that have been discussed in our community. For example, you may have heard about nothing at stake or grinding. And today, as suggested by the title of my talk, I'm going to focus on one specific attack that has been discussed in the literature, and it's called long-range attacks. So for those of you who don't know what they are, I'm going to explain quickly. So in a long-range attack, we have an adversary that somehow obtained the keys of past validators. So we have these validators. They were in the consensus protocol. Then they decided to leave. They have no more stake in the system. So it could be very easy for an adversary to just like bribe them into selling their old keys that they used to use for the protocol, because there's just like no money attached to it anymore. So that's the main problem. And then if this happens, then obviously that's very problematic, because an adversary that has even the previous keys that were used to run the protocol, it could just create an alternative chain, and it could do that in no time. Because we are doing proof of stake, we are not doing proof of work, so you can just create block with like the validator signatures. So an adversary could create a chain that is as long as the honest chain, or even longer. So that's very problematic, because our users that are using the system, if they just wake up and they see those two chains, they have no way to know which one is the right one and which one is the adversarial one. Okay. So this is the, yes?
But the advisory cannot fake the most recent block. So if I'm just joining, I still choose the longest whatever chain to attach to. Would that be fine?
No. The adversary can fake the block up until the same height of the honest chain.
But these guys would not have the incentive. They may still have stake in the system, so they may have incentive to sell their.
Yes. But like the adversary will just not include it in its chain, the reconfiguration. So there will be one chain with like, the new validators that still have stake, and another chain, maybe the adversary faked some, reconfiguration, but the idea is like here, it will still be the adversary, that will be the validators, right? So yeah, makes sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's okay. So yeah, I was saying that's the motivation. But let me know if it's not. That's the motivation behind our work. Winkle is to give a way for users who have been online for some time and who just wake up and see these two chains. They can decide which one is the right one. Okay, so the main idea behind our work is to have our users, Alice and Bob, so who are not the validators, sign the blocks. And so the idea is like, if we do that, then the adversary that does the long-range attack, it will create an alternative chain, but all the users that were online and transacting, like they will not sign the adversarial chain. So for example, someone who wakes up will see, oh wait, Alice and Bob have signed this block, so this is the adversarial chain. So that's basically the main intuition between this. And so how does this happen? And this happens by having users including in their transaction their vote. So now in a transaction, just as before, we're going to have a sender, a receiver, an amount, and a block. So the idea is like it's not going to be any extra work for the users, right? They will just like add a hash in their transaction. We don't ask that they take part in the protocol, in the consensus protocol more than that. Okay, now you may ask, what's the motivation? Why are we doing that? You could also maybe argue that an adversary could also operate a long-range attack on the users. And really, like our main motivation for doing that is that there are, many users. Yeah?
What prevents the adversary from also spawning out some fake users and do the same thing as?
Okay, so I'm going to come to that very soon, but the idea is that we're going to weight the vote, so the signature of users, by the amount of coins that they have. So an adversary that just creates like empty accounts and submit vote, it's not actually going to count towards the weight, if you want, of the chain.
But that means that the weighting is not going to be dependent on the holding of the tokens, rather than who actually spends, who has tokens and also spend the transactional.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm gonna, so that's why it's a bit difficult to do that. I'm gonna come to that in the next slide, but I'll explain that. That's indeed like one of the difficulties that we had. It's like the money is like changing heads, so how do you weight votes? I'm gonna explain that. So just like quickly, just to explain, like as I said, the motivation is that there are a lot of users, and they compare to like the number of validators. For example, blockchain and Ethereum, there's like 1 billion public key. Yes?
It's a bit misleading to look at the total number of users, though. If the wealth is really concentrated, the attacker wouldn't have to.
Yeah. That's a good point. So actually, I didn't put it in my slide because I thought it looked like more, I don't know, visual. But in our paper, we have like a graph of like how the concentration of stake is distributed. And so basically, so I don't remember exactly, but if I'm not right, I think for Ethereum, we had something like 1/3 of the stake was concentrated between like a bit less than 1,000 public keys or something like that. So sure, it's less than like 1 billion, but it's still like way more than, for example, Ethereum, there's like what, 5 miners, same for Bitcoin. So so in the paper that is going to be online soon, we have a graph that explains that.
Also quibble and say the 1,000 public keys might not be 1,000 in 1,000 different places with 1,000 different people.
Yeah, I mean, like that's true. It's like like we need to have some kind of like decentralized like concentration of stake, but like the point is like it's more decentralized than the like consensus protocol, which we've seen is like. Very terrible. Like even here, I have like 100,000 validators, but that's like an ideal number that we had for proof of stake. Like currently, as I said, Bitcoin, Ethereum is like 4 or 5 validators, which is kind of like ridiculously small. So the idea is to have like another layer that makes this attack harder, right? Okay. So now I've explained the motivation. Let's go to the core of the protocol, and so to go back to yours. Okay, so just to sum up, so Winkle, we have users that include in their transaction votes for blocks, right? And that's to authenticate the right chain. So before we have this BFT-like protocol, there is no fork. So for a user that is online, it's not like they have to choose, who I'm going to vote for. As long as you're online, you know what block to vote for. And so again, to answer, I think was your question, each coin carries a vote, and that's how we're going to weight the vote, right? And also, as a condition, we ask, since these are the online users that perform this mechanism, so they have to vote for the, kind of like latest block or like the latest epoch, if you consider an epoch as, a series of blocks. And that's, again, because these users, they are online. Okay, so yes?
So if I want to if we have a multi-sig account and I want to sign it and give it to you, and you might want to sign it and submit it in a year, is that a problem? Because now the block that we reference is a year old, or?
Yes, that's a problem actually, yeah. We ask that it's up to date, yeah. Yes?
The committee, you're choosing it according to the stake or the standard?
So the BFT committee, I'm kind of like abstracting away. So it's based on proof of stake. So we kind of like assume that there is some, working. As I said, it could be like a permission things like Libra or other proof of stake. I'm kind of like not really like.
Then you have like an assumption on the majority of stake within the validators and then the majority of stake within the users, or?
Oh, so I mean the validators are also users, right? They could be. But the users are not always validators. Is it? No, yeah.
When you're choosing the BFT committee, you're doing it only from the validators, right?
The BFT is only validators, yeah.
Majority of stake among just the validators for that?
Yeah.
For the voting, majority of stake among
of the total, yeah, of the total stake. Yeah. Okay.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So if I'm an adversary, I would censor all transactions that does not vote for my whatever fake blocks, right? So then in my new whatever fake chain, you will see actually I do have a lot of votes for.
Yeah, definitely. So that's coming in my slides. Yeah, I'll answer to that in a couple of slides. Okay. So first I'm just gonna illustrate more this kind of like weighting of coins, because I think that can be a bit tricky, and then I'll explain this. Okay, so let's say that we start with one block where account A has 2 coins and account B has 1 coin, and by default we assume that everyone votes for the genesis block because we assume everyone knows about the genesis block. Okay, now account A sends a coin to C and votes for B1, right? So the idea is that when A sends its coin, the coin is gonna carry its vote. So now the coins associated with account C has a vote for B1. And so has the coins that is left in A account. So we have like 2 out of 3 votes for B1. So that's how we do our counting. And so then, similarly, if B sends a coin to A and that votes for B2, that coins that has been sent by B is like tainting by this vote. So here we have 2 coins that vote for B1 and 1 for B2. You have a question or no? Yeah? Yeah.
Question. So if we update the list of validators after a specific number of blocks.
So sorry.
If we update the list of validators after a specific number of blocks, for example, after 10,000 of block, each validator should get a new list of validators.
Yeah, like reconfiguration, yeah?
Yeah. So wouldn't that solve this problem?
No, because
then
yeah.
you know the new validators, and previous validators cannot build a block for that range,
So
which the new validator is supposed to.
So in our security, we assume that someone is like waking up for a long period of time, and so they didn't know if there was like a reconfiguration of validators. That's the assumption. I mean, what we are trying to protect against. Can I go, or is there no? Okay. Okay. So I think that's like really the main intuition between how like the voting works. So hopefully that's clear. It's clear enough. So as I said, you kind of like have to be like up to date, so vote for the latest block or epoch. And once there is like 2/3 of votes for a certain block, then the block is like checkpointed. And according to our security assumption, it means that there cannot be another block that is not consistent with this one that is going to be checkpointed. Okay, so that's for the protocol. Now, again, I'm going to come back to your question and kind of like try to look at what could go wrong. And indeed, what could go wrong is that our adversary is also allowed to own coins. And let's, for example, just have a look at this configuration just for the sake of like illustration of the problem. We assume that Bob, sends 1 coin to the adversary, and the adversary sends 1 coin to Alice. So that's the honest chain. So you see in the honest chain, if we allow the adversary to have 1/3 of the money, then here the adversary has 1/3, here the adversary has 1/3 of the coins, no problem. But in the adversarial chain that the adversary is going to do as part of the long-range attack, the adversary could handpick what transaction it's going to include. So that's what you were mentioning. And especially in that case, the adversary should be like, I never, sent my coin to Alice. And in the adversarial chain, now the adversary has 2 coins. And if it has 2 coins out of 3, it can fake a checkpoint. So that's why this is kind of like a tricky problem, because we have this idea that the adversary can kind of like choose what transaction to include and not, and also this idea that money is like by design changing hands like all the time. So yeah, more stake. So that was like, I would say, like the difficulty in doing such a scheme. Okay, so now about the security, why our scheme is secure. So what we assume is that the adversary has some fraction Fy of the total stake. And now we additionally have to add some other bound about the amount of money that is allowed to move. Because if there is too much, then that opens the door to like attacks. And what we ask is that these 2 values, Fy and Fx, they verify this inequality. And as long as we have that, then the adversary cannot obtain more than a third of stake in its coin, and then it cannot basically forge a checkpoint. So also, I know we've been talking a lot about like tunable security. So I think here also as well, you could kind of like choose what your assumption is depending on how much money you want to give to the adversary, or if you want to have like a more flexible system where you can exchange like more money. So yeah, that's also, we discussed some bounds also in the paper, but that's basically flexible. Yes.
Fy, the fraction of the total stake, or the fraction of the stake that moved in a block?
No, of the total stake.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about key rotation. So we also add in this game a key rotation. So this is to allow the adversary to dynamically corrupt new users. So the idea is like some users can decide, Alice to like change her public key to PK1 from PK1 to PK2. And if she does so, she has, just like she would in a normal transaction, include a vote for a block, right? And this allows forward security. So again, I'm going to quickly illustrate this and like why we add key rotation. So let's assume that in this state, the adversary, has corrupted Bob, so has access to the secret key associated with PKB1. And later on, we allow the adversary to like change and corrupt Alice. So now, because Alice's key rotation includes a commitment to Bob's key rotation because it has, a vote for block B1, then if the adversary wants to like use Alice key PKA2, it has to include the key rotation from PKB1 to PKB2. So it means that the adversary cannot like accumulate both keys. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, cool. No. Okay, so now I'm gonna talk, yes?
I'm just a bit confused. So
yes.
Security is same as what the BFT standard security is, right? Having at most 1/3 of the replicas who can be malicious, or at least 1/3 of the nodes can be malicious. That is what Winkle's security is, right? So, because you said fx plus f by 2 is less than 1/3, and that is also what the standard BFT requirement is. Mm-hmm. So, it is basically running a BFT protocol. That's
so they are not. So the validators are running a BFT protocol, but the users, so the adversary that has money and is not, for example, part of the validators, they are not running a protocol. They are just voting on the consensus protocol underlying.
Yes, but BFT also says that it's basically voting on the consensus protocol. I mean, BFT is nothing special apart from voting. There can be any number of phases. There can be 1 phase, 2 phase, 3 phase, depending on the security of the protocol, but that is also just voting, if I understand. And so, how is this different? I'm just curious in that terms.
So, like the difference is like in our case we have some threat model where the adversary has corrupted the BFT consensus protocol by corrupting the previous keys of the validators. So now, like the adversary is faking a BFT protocol on its own chain.
With less than 1/3 of number.
No, with more than 1/3. So remember at the beginning I was saying that past validators that choose to be validators for the consensus protocol, they left the protocol, right? Because they don't want to stay forever. And now they have no more stake in the system, so the adversary can just be like, hey, I'll give you €1 and you give me your secret key. And then the secret key is worth nothing because they already, cash out and they are not part of the system anymore. So that's the threat model that we have. It's like the adversary compromise like the past validators because they have no more stake in the system. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to go ahead if time is running short, but I'm still confused about key rotation. Sure.
Okay. So in this block, the adversary has access to this secret key, right? PKB1. And later, the adversary corrupts Alice, right? So you could think that in the adversarial chain, the adversary will just omit the fact that Bob has, rotated its key. And so the adversary has 2 keys. Bob's and Alice, right? But because we add key rotation, Alice's key rotation, it's like bounded to Bob's key rotation. So it means that if the adversary wants to control Alice account, it has to include Bob's key rotation, and the adversary does not have access to this public key.
Conceptually, you make it harder because the adversary has to buy the entire history, the entire past.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So getting back, so the number of total validators in your system is constant, right? Total validators.
No. Why?
I mean, how much is the adversary amount of adversary can the system have in your case?
In terms of stake.
Yes. Yeah.
So remember my previous slide, we have some kind of like inequality, which is Fy plus Fx to yeah, exactly. So that's in terms of stake. Yeah.
And that will be always constant throughout the running of the protocol, throughout the whole period of time, right?
Yeah. So that and that's why we had key rotation. Is like to say that at each period of time the adversary has that much stake, and then if the adversary wants to like change because of our key rotation, it is able to do so. But at each period of time in the honest chain, at each block, the adversary has at most Fy stake. Yes, yeah.
Is it possible for the adversary, once they know a key, to predict future keys in the key rotation?
To predict?
How do you compute the future keys when you do a key rotation?
Oh, I mean, you compute it yourself, right?
Yeah, but given a person who has the key, could they compute future keys?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, what you're saying, like the adversary could have access to their key, this key, and then fake a key rotation in its own chain. Yeah, it could do that. Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, but then that doesn't change anything. The adversary still has access to Bob's account. So yeah, that doesn't change anything if the adversary does that. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. There was other question, or should I go through? Yeah, it's fine. Okay, so I think anyway, it's hopefully almost done. Okay, so yeah, one more problem that can arise now. It's like about minting and block rewards, right? Because in a lot of protocols, like when you create a block, when you participate in the consensus protocol, you get rewarded, and very often new coins are created. And so in this case, if the adversary has an adversarial chain, they could just take all the rewards to themselves, and very easily they would be able to get 2/3 of the money, right? So in order to solve this problem, what we ask is that every mint transaction needs to be checkpointed before it takes effect. So it means that whenever there will be like a mint transaction in a block, like the the coins will be created effectively. For example, I don't know, some blocks later when the transaction has been checkpointed. Okay, and by the way, this is related to the stake bleeding attacks, if some of you are familiar with this. Okay, so now I'll say I don't have much time. I'll say a very quick word about efficiency. And yeah, we are waiting for users to transact. That can be long. And we made some experiments on Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it is long. Yes, it is very long, between 50 days and a year. In Bitcoin, up to 3 years. One of the main reasons is this like hodl movement, so people really don't transact a lot, and that's a problem. Okay, so one thing that we discuss in the paper that probably I will not have time to go into detail is to add some kind of like delegation scheme where users can delegate their stake to like another user that is maybe more active. Very quickly, it may sound weird because doing delegation adds more centralization, which was kind of like exactly what we are trying not to do, if that makes sense. But in order to do that, we want to have some kind of like trade-off between having a good efficiency and not too much decentralization. So we use some economic incentives to obtain exactly K pools. This is based on a paper by Lars Pons and his co-authors. I think also Vasilis mentioned in his talk, reward sharing schemes for stake pools. And so that's to ensure that we have enough decentralization so that it's hard for an adversary to corrupt everyone, but still good efficiency. And indeed, we kind of like simulated this delegation on the Ethereum and Bitcoin network, and that is much, much better. Okay, so now I'm actually done. Just to say that in addition to what I've just talked about, you could also think about adding some similar mechanism on proof of work, because right now, for example, Bitcoin has a centralized checkpointing mechanism. So if we wanted to make that decentralized, we could actually think about doing something similar on Bitcoin. No? Okay, okay, so yeah, so that's how you would do it. I'm probably not going to go into the detail. And also the paper is going to be online very soon if you want to have a look at it. And I don't know if we have time for questions or no. Yes?
I came in a little late, but I'm confused. So one thing is that, for instance, in Snow White, we show that if you have a checkpointing and periodic social consensus, you can solve the long-range attack problem. So how does your because that is like a very simple and clean solution, and people have to download the software anyway, right? So like the social consensus already exists. So
okay.
A lot of add-on complexity to the code.
Okay, well, I mean,
do you have a strong motivation for doing this in comparison, for instance, with Snow White's approach?
So wait, is the Snow White also like decentralized?
Yeah, it's a decentralized proof.
But is it the validators that run the consensus protocol? Because my understanding that it was.
If you trust an authority to checkpoint, yeah, you can checkpoint. So if the software vendor is trusted to checkpoint, yeah, you solve the checkpoint.
Yes, Snow White doesn't have erasure.
Oh, you have to say pointing after again.
We show a law upon that. Basically, if you don't have any extra setup assumptions, including erasure, like defending against such attacks in a dynamic network where people can join late is impossible.
So who is doing the checkpointing then?
The protocol has an in-protocol checkpointing mechanism where people consider some prefix of the blockchain to be final, and then they'll insist on only accepting chains that extend the checkpointed prefix.
Okay, but then, okay, I'm not sure I understand then how the adversary that is creating the long-range attack cannot, that has the keys from the previous validator is?
The network that's like some kind of weak periodic social consensus where you can find, you have common knowledge of like some checkpointing.
Okay.
And the checkpointing frequency doesn't have to be so frequent as like the finalization period. It can be like a every day.
Okay, so for me, I mean, for me it's not clear how, like who is doing this checkpointing and how an adversary that has enough keys cannot also fake this. But maybe you can explain to me later, because yeah, basically, I mean, for us, like I think there are a lot of people that do like checkpointing, but in a kind of like centralized way, right?
No, this is a distributed protocol where inbuilt mechanism.
Okay, well, okay, maybe you can explain to me later, and then I can say. Yes.
So it seems like a good idea. Like you're kind of saying, like, hey, we can get this free validation by piggybacking on these other signatures people are.
Yeah.
But there would be a downside if it like breaks Lightning and payment channels. So I'm wondering, like, how bad would it be if, for example, I don't know, there's like you can include an older block, but maybe your transaction fee is higher, or if you have multi-sig, only one of the signers needs to like validate the block or something.
So I think maybe this could be solved by the delegation, right? Because like even if you're transacting with like some wallet or using Lightning or something, then and let's say you have like another I don't know, or someone you have another account that is kind of like transacting like on chain, maybe like less often or something like that. Then you could just like.
The whole point of Lightning is not to touch the chain, right? You might want to go a whole month without touching the blockchain.
Yeah, but because I mean I think Lightning also is because you do kind of like a lot of transaction, right? So that's why you want to go like off-chain. So, like, okay, one way to dealing with that could be just like to delegate with another account that maybe you don't do a lot of transactions, so you don't actually need the Lightning, and then the.
Delegate your bank essentially, but then that seems very centralized.
Well, so yeah, it is, and that's what I was saying. So that's why also we kind of like we're thinking of applying this like incentive scheme to be sure that even if we have some, banks or pools that comes, just for convenience and efficiency, there are still enough that we have more decentralization, just to have a trade-off, because otherwise.
How bad would it be if, only, because there's always one person who's going to submit it, so that person could always, certify some block. It's just that, everybody else who signed off on the transaction might have done so a long time ago. So, how much worse would your scheme be if you allowed there to be only one of n signers who actually, include a block?
We're gonna take this up.
Okay. No worries. Thank you.